Good evening, members, and welcome to the meeting of the Scrutiny Committee for Leader in Finance and Performance on Wednesday, the 13th of January 2021, which is going out via remote video link. The committee this evening is joined by officers of Democratic Services, Legal Services and the management team. In addition, the leader and the deputy leader of the council are present. My first duty is to conduct a roll call. If you would say present after I call your name, thank you. Vice Chairman Councillor Pulfer, please. Councillor Pulfer.
Present, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Alison Bennett.
Present.
Councillor Heidi Brunson.
Present.
Councillor Cartwright.
Present.
Councillor Coots. I have seen you. Councillor Coots. Councillor Cromie.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Anne Eves.
Present.
Councillor Hicks.
Present.
Councillor Jackson.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Knight, I'm here. Councillor Lee. Andrew Lee.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Phillips.
Present.
Councillor Lynn Stockwell.
Present.
Councillor Trumbull.
Present.
Councillor Whitaker.
Present.
Councillor John Ash Edwards.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Judy Llewellyn Burke.
Present.
Thank you very much. I now hand over to our legal officer, Tom, who will provide a meeting explanation. There are some procedural changes tonight, which he's about to explain to you as well. Thank you. Tom, you're on mute.
Sorry. This is a virtual meeting which has been allowed by regulations since the beginning of April 2020. This is due to the pandemic. Members are in charge of their own microphone, but the chairman, of course, is in charge of the meeting. He will call members to speak at the appropriate time. At the present time, the electronic voting is only working to a minimum aspect, and we're having to use the raise hands. So when we get to the end of the one report on the agenda, I will be taking a named vote, as I would have to at council on the budget. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, you're mute now.
I do beg your pardon, members. Declarations, sorry, items 2 and 3, substitutes and absence, I have none. Item 4, declarations of interest. Do I have any declarations of interest from any members on the agenda tonight, please? Please raise your hand. Okay, I see none. Item 5, so here we're going to use raise your hand to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of August 2020, please. Raise your hand button.
Chairman, I'm assuming that only those present can actually agree the minutes at that meeting.
Yes, Councillor Brunson.
Yes.
Okay, we have 13 votes in favour. Thank you very much. That's carried. Agreed. Item 6, to consider any items the chairman agrees to take as urgent business. Now, I've had a few emails in for people asking for me to raise an urgent item in relation to Clare Hall. I think a number of you would have seen some posts going out on social media today, and I'm going to disbar this as an urgent item, and the reasons are as follows. Firstly, the Save Clare Hall post is inaccurate, and they are also not the claimant. Also, this business normally goes before the other scrutiny committee, not mine. And detail of costs, etc., are not available. So I'm not allowing any discussion on that tonight. I hope you understand that. Okay, to the substantive item for tonight. Item 7, the draft corporate plan and budget 2021-22. Members have had the opportunity to ask in advance questions on detail or the report's content. I would like to thank the Chief Executive for sending out in advance the draft copy and responding to pre-submitted questions and queries. And I thank you to members for helping the process by submitting these questions for clarification and understanding. I would like to remind members of the Council's priorities, which are effective and responsive services, sustainable economic growth, strong and resilient communities, and financial independence. If members would be kind as to keep to these in mind when asking questions or making comments on whether the support might affect the priorities, it again will help the process. I would now like to turn to the leader, Councillor Jonathan Edwards, for some opening comments, followed by the Chief Exec. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for that. I'll be brief. We're in the slightly unusual position this year of considering a budget and corporate plan, having considered a revised corporate plan in the middle of the current financial year due to the need to refresh the plans in light of the pandemic. And so it's only a few months since we had those conversations at this committee and at full council, Chairman, and the priorities and work streams that we agreed in that document are integrated into these plans and budgets for the forthcoming year. So I think important that members sort of go back a little bit to that work that we did in the autumn and see what's in front of you now as a continuation of that work. As the committee will know, the pandemic has and continues to have a significant negative effect on the council's financial position, notwithstanding the financial support that the government has put in place. That's the case for all councils nationally. We're not in any different position to others. And members know that the impact of closing and reopening leisure centres, as seems to be a regular occurrence now, is the largest such impact on the budget, and that financial support package is in place now in order to cover those costs, but it is a very significant draw on the council's finances. As members will see, the strategy outlined is to continue using the council's reserves to underpin the council services during the current time. There's likely to be a lag to that as the economy recovers. I think the current lockdown means that the bounce back of income and recovery more generally is going to be delayed and is going to not kick in perhaps at the kind of speed that we might have previously liked. And so we just need to be mindful of the fact that that continuation of drawing on reserves, while we're able to do it because we entered the crisis in a strong position with good reserves, that clearly cannot continue indefinitely. And over the medium term, we need to make sure that we're bringing the budget back into balance and actually rebuilding the reserves over time. You can only spend that money once. And so the budget sets out various steps that can be taken at this stage. Unfortunately, one of those does mean an increase in council tax next year. But really important that we put the council's finances on as secure a footing as possible for the future, because actually if we don't, that has a direct impact on the services that we provide to our communities. And Chairman, really the key priority of the council needs to continue to be the response to the pandemic, supporting our community, supporting local businesses through this incredibly difficult period. But I think we should also remember that there are some really ambitious and positive plans that were outlined in the revised corporate plan in the autumn and that take part of this as well. And as hopefully we begin to see a light at the end of the tunnel, actually it will be really positive seeing many of those plans continue to come to fruition. But we mustn't underestimate the impact that the current situation and current lockdowns are continuing to have, unfortunately. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Edwards. Chief Exec, Catherine, would you like to make some opening comments?
Thank you very much, Chairman. In fact, I think I think Councillor Edwards has summarised it really well. I think from the committees, for the committee's point of view, all the chief officers and myself are present. We'll do our very best to answer any questions that you have. You will I imagine, wish to debate this matter though, rather than simply a questions and answer session. The big issue in front of us, as the leader has outlined, is that currently, just to cut to it, it's costing somewhere between £2 to £2.5 million a year more to run the council than we have available to us. And the report explains the impact of that. We're going to use reserves in the medium term to support us, but longer term, the planning assumption is that our income will return and bring the budget back into balance. If that doesn't happen, we'll have to have a rethink, but those are not choices ahead of us tonight. Things remain too uncertain to proceed too quickly down that path. So those are the issues before us. And as the leaders also said, we've done an awful lot of the work, and the principles underpinning the paper in front of you tonight were agreed by the council as recently as September. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chief Exec. Members, the report starts on page 7, the bottom right numbers, and I'll be taking it in 3 sections. First is the summary pages, which is 1125. Second will be the service plans and summary budget plans, and then finally the capital programme. So we'll go to the summary pages, and again the Chief Exec is going to introduce it. They start on page 11.
Thank you, Chairman. So what we've done here really is we've just summarised the main issues in front of the council in terms of setting its budget and service plans for the next financial year, and we've done our very best to keep up to date, but you'll appreciate that that's easier said than done in the current context. So we've the version you have in front of you was updated for the provisional settlement, which was announced just before Christmas, but it obviously doesn't take account of the restrictions announced over the Christmas period and the implications of them for us, for example, like our leisure centres closing. So the report doesn't capture those implications. You'll understand that. So I think it's better, Chairman, if we proceed through these sections and any comments or questions that members wish to have or debate, I hope, on the major issues. But this should be familiar to members of the committee because you did, as I say, consider it as recently as August and then again as a council in September.
Thank you, Catherine. The summary pages are on 11 to 25. So if members would raise their hand if they wish to speak and perhaps state the page they're referencing, that would help me. Thank you. Councillor Alison Bennett, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm looking at page 11, paragraph 1.4, line 2. It talks about whether the council should be actively commercial where circumstances demand. I picked up last week some comment from the Minister about councils needing to change their approach to commercial investments. And it would be interesting to have a debate around the committee about what people think about that and what would be appropriate for Mid-Sussex. Thank you.
Councillor Jonathan Edwards, would you like to start that one off, please?
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, the Minister did make some comments last week on this. They weren't particularly directed at councils like Mid-Sussex. I mean, we've taken a very cautious approach. I mean, essentially, we're talking about commercial property investments, and we've taken, as members will know, a very cautious approach over the years to that. We've very much focused on ensuring that we're not, particularly highly leveraged, which we're not. We focused on where we've bought assets, buying assets in the district that we know and where there's often a synergy with the council's existing land holdings. So, the biggest at the Orchards, we bought the leasehold interest back, but the council was already the freeholder and already had skin in the game there anyway. And so we're not in the position that some other authorities are in, who are very highly leveraged, who have spent sums of money, many multiples of their annual budget, or who've gone on big spending sprees sort of miles away from the areas that they know. And clearly the government has sought to tighten up some of the borrowing rules around that as well. And so I think it's important to strike a balance, really. There is going to be a need ongoing for councils to generate diverse sources of revenue. That's just the reality of where we are, and we need to balance the risks and the benefits of that as ever. And any individual decision is subject to the usual financial procedures for members to consider. And I think the other important factor in that is considering regeneration opportunities as well. And the Minister is very clear that the government wants to see councils prioritising improvements to their communities and regeneration opportunities rather than sort of speculative investment, as has caused a great deal of issue in some other councils.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lee, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So I'd like to just touch on the issue of uncertainty which faces us, and I guess this kind of summary is the best place to do it. I'm going to mention West Sussex County Council, so I'll declare an interest as being a member of it. So this district, like the rest of the world, is in uncharted waters, facing unknown changes, and we all know that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So what features of this plan, of this corporate plan, means it will be resilient in the face of substantial and essentially unforeseeable external changes, such as in the economy due to the pandemic, or by decisions of third parties such as West Sussex County Council? Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hesh-Edwards, would you like to try and answer that one, please?
Yes, certainly, Chairman. I mean, I think the approach that we've been able to take over the last year, actually, I think demonstrates that we're able to do that where required. I mean, when we debated the budget and corporate plan at the beginning of March, end of February, I think it was, last year, I don't think anyone really foresaw, what would unfold a little over a month or so later. But actually, over the course of the year, we have had a flexible approach that has enabled us to be agile in responding to the needs of the local community and the local economy, and the additional requirements that councils have had placed on them by government in dealing with the pandemic. And we've essentially, the key really answer to Councillor Lee's question is making sure that you have a financial position that is strong enough to be able to weather the storm. And that's where we entered the pandemic. We had over time rebuilt the council's reserves, got the council into as strong a financial position as possible, and that's what's seeing us through the current time. And so that, and that approach will continue to serve us well over the coming year. Like to think that the next year isn't going to be any worse than the last one, but hard to rule anything out these days. But essentially, the council will need to be able to flex, to be agile, and to use its reserves to underpin the sort of business as usual of day-to-day services. And as I said, longer term, we will need to rebuild from that, because that isn't sustainable. I would also just add, Chairman, that the financial the income support scheme that the government has put in place for local authorities does also respond in an agile manner as well. So that's the scheme that covers 75% of some types of lost revenue after we've paid the first 5%. The government's extended that back into the first quarter of the new financial year, and so that will continue to provide some additional support on some types of lost income that floats up and down according to whatever income is lost as a result of COVID impacts.
Thank you very much. Councillor Whittaker, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'd like to also pick up on paragraph 1.4, page 11. I'm very encouraged and very confident about the actively commercial use, because clearly this council has been doing that in a very commercial way, managing their budgets over the last decade, as also mentioned in the papers. And in fact, this council, and through this committee previously last year, has already identified a part reserves replacement plan, essentially through the estates and the legal team. So I'm very pleased that has gone through and that has been identified. So, you know, I'd like to thank the officers concerned, and I'm very reassured by the budgetary control, and I'm sure this plan through this year and the coming years will be successful. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Whittaker. Councillor Hicks. You're on mute, Councillor Hicks. Oh, there we go.
Chairman. I'd like to particularly highlight in terms of the level of reserves. It's important we have an understanding. Whilst we're lucky to be able to have sufficient reserves to fall back on in these uncertain times, I would prefer a bit more clarity, I think, on in terms of 3.17 on page 16, in terms of the projection of reserves, to be clear about the impact both of the individual annual budgets and any other movements, so we can fully reconcile that. But I can see we have sufficient reserves, but I can't quite reconcile the movements. And I think it's important to distinguish between the ongoing budget changes that we're agreeing and any particular COVID pressures, such as the leisure centres and the parking fees. I'm particularly thinking of the leisure centres. I can see the specific management fee in terms of the 1.4 million.
Councillor Hicks, what is your specific question? I might have missed that at the start. Have you got a specific question there?
Well, in terms of the management fee itself for the leisure centres, we also discussed the additional costs that would have to be paid out, and in terms of their sort of subsidising their running costs, and I can't see that that's included in the figure. So, can that just be confirmed?
So that's a question of what's going to be the impact on the general reserve, I guess. But
in terms, well, it was a general statement, but as I say, there's additional running costs for the leisure centres, which I assume are not in the budget, because we presumably when the budget was drawn up, we had assumed they would remain open. But if we're having to pay additional costs on top of the loss of the management fee, do we have an estimate of what the impact that might be for this financial year, for example? Secondly, I'd like to ask, in terms of the job evaluation provision that we're putting away, there's no timetable for when that might be implemented. It's not in the operational plan for the HR department. I'd like a timescale for that, please.
Okay, well, we'll be coming to the individual budgets later on. But
it's not the budget; it's the provision which is not in the budget specifically.
Okay, thank you. Chief Exec, would you like to comment? Yeah.
Yes, of course, Chairman. So I'm going to direct the 3 points that Councillor Hicks makes. I think Peter Stewart can assist with points 1 and 3, which are around reserves and the JE scheme. And then Judy Holmes will be able to comment on the impact of the leisure centres being closed again. But I know what she's going to say. She's going to say it's very difficult to estimate that at the moment because we don't know how long they'll be closed for. And that is in the current year, of course. What we're budgeting for is from April onwards. But she'll be able to clarify that point. So perhaps if we go, Chairman, to Peter for points 1 and 3.
Peter, would you like to comment, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I mean, the questions are all interrelated, as you'll appreciate. As paragraph 3.17 says, we have taken a view on the draws on the general reserve, one of which, of course, is to finance the deficit over the 4-year period. And at this point, I really ought to say that you have before you a 4-year period financial plan, years 1 to 4, year 1 being 21-22 and year 4 being 24-25. It has been incredibly difficult to put these figures together over this time, and I can almost guarantee you that years 3 and 4 are wrong. I think most members will appreciate that I cannot, none of us, I don't think, could actually project forward, forecast forward. Actually, it's hard enough for next year, actually, but 4 years, 3 and 4 years hence. So these figures will change. So when it comes to paragraph 3.17, I don't think we'll ever get to a position where we are down to our last £2 million. That's the first thing to say. Things will change next year, and Judy will talk about the leisure contract, no doubt. But of course, it does have a bearing. And to answer the question in a very short way, we have not allowed for any increase in cost, support, in other words, to leisure centres. What we have allowed for is the complete absence of the £1.4 million of leisure centre income from the contract for next year and for each of the next 4 years. Now you have to ask yourself, is that a realistic forecast? It's my best forecast right now. To change those figures would mean having better information. I don't have better information. So we've used if you like, a blanket 1.4 loss across the board for the medium-term financial plan. Now, there are other draws on the reserves, such as the capital programme in 21-22, as the footnote says, but we haven't allowed anything for capital programme costs in 22, 23, 23, 24. We don't know what they are yet. There will be draws on the reserves for those years, but similarly, there'll also be money coming in, which we don't know about yet as well. At one point, we thought New Homes Bonus would have finished. We were told New Homes Bonus was going to finish last year, or actually this year. It hasn't done. The government's rolled it forward. These are extraordinary times. I've been in finance for some years now, I suppose, and I've never known a time when there's such uncertainty both about income, also expenditure, but also income that we had never predicted, such as grants from the government. And to their credit, I know this won't be universally appreciated, but to their credit, I think the MHCLG have done a pretty good job actually in supporting councils through the crisis. I mean, most of our income losses are being subsidised by the service sales fees and charges scheme, which pays out 75% of losses over 5% of a baseline. So the short answer is we put in that table in 3.17 what we know about right now. We obviously haven't put in there what we don't know about, and we haven't made too many guesses about either. We've tried to show this in the most prudent way we can to give you I suppose, the worst possible case. I'd like to think it is the worst possible case, but we'll see. Because we do still have time between now and when we set the budget on the 3rd of March to change these figures if circumstances demand that.
Thank you, Mr.
Now, on your other point, point 3, I suppose, really, the job evaluation reserve. Yes, we were hoping to put the job evaluation in this year. Circumstances dictated that wasn't really possible. We are still trying to do that. I'm hoping we'll be able to put that in 21-22. Of course, it means having to make a provision against costs. We do think there will be some increase in cost, especially at the lower end of the establishment. Let's say the grades 3, 4, 5, where actually there are more people in those posts. Therefore, although the individual cost is smaller, aggregated it up, it's a higher cost. But it's only fair that if we are going to bring a JE scheme in, a job evaluation scheme in 21-22, that we make financial provision for that, which is what we've done for next year and the years going on. I'll hand over to Judy now.
Thank you. Judy, you're sounding like a church mouse there. Can you try again? I just can't hear you now. Councillor Hicks, we'll come back to your question if we can move on to speed things up. Thank you. Councillor Eaves, please. Anne Eves.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to submit questions in advance. That was
No,
very
thank
useful.
you for doing that. That does help the process. Thank you.
Yes, really helpful. I'm looking at page 12, Council's Priorities and Statement of Main Purpose, 2.4, 2.5. The Statement of Main Purpose is really good, but I think in the 2.5, the priorities, there is one glaring omission because we're forgetting the other emergency, which is the climate, basically. And although it says sustainable economic growth, often economic growth and sustainability are completely at loggerheads and entirely incompatible. So I think we should be putting in our priorities the reduction of our carbon emissions as a separate target. And there's an organisation called the Tyndall Centre, and they evaluate for each local authority what we should be reducing by to comply with the Paris Agreement. And for this authority, it's 13% per year reduction in our carbon emissions. So not just the council, but area wide. So I'm just issuing a plea not to forget the climate emergency. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Sorry, I'm just getting feedback on the earpiece. Thank you. Councillor Cartwright, please.
Good evening. I do sympathise with Peter Stewart's problems with getting figures together under these circumstances. It's a perfect storm from an accountant's point of view. I'm on page 17. I was looking at the line called Savings from Efficiency Programme. The target figures do look quite mild compared with the flow from reserves and the general underperformance on income. But my question really was that we've had a year now where we've been working in new ways. And I was just wondering whether there are any areas where it's perceptible where we have made cost savings because of the new ways that people have been working, the office obviously in particular. And are these then reflected in the figures for 2020, 21-22, in which case are the efficiency savings put in there over and above what we've experienced so far, and they are sort of in the unknown category, or where are we on this one? Thank you.
Chief Exec, would you like to a go at that one, please?
Yes, certainly, Chairman. So we're currently showing, just in the middle of the medium-term financial plan there on page 17, 250k, so £250,000 worth of savings per annum across the term, which is actually a fairly considerable amount of money from my point of view in terms of our biggest staff cost, our cost, which is staff. So I think we just need to bear in mind what we're talking about when we start about saving big chunks of money. By far the biggest cost to us as an authority is what it costs to employ people. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you've touched on efficiencies. This current year that we're in now, not the year we're debating, has been extraordinarily challenging for the officers of this council in terms of their role locally and nationally in managing the pandemic. So the efficiencies we have identified have been around things like using technology to assist members of the public in a way that possibly we didn't do before the restrictions were imposed, but they aren't cashable savings, at least as of now. Now, if you remember back to the council meeting in September, a key portion of the action plan that you agreed for the revised plan was a whole section around improving the efficiency and the redesign of our services, to use digital technologies more, and to make sure that that we are using our people to best effect where they can really have an impact on often very vulnerable groups that they are supporting through very difficult times. And that work will begin in earnest in the financial year that you're discussing. And therefore, that is the aim is to achieve savings, cashable savings of around 250k from that work stream.
Thank you, Chief Exec. Councillor Heidi Brunson.
Thank you, Chairman. the financial shockwaves across the economy of Mid Sussex, with the end of furlough planned at the end of April, and the consequential downturn we must expect in Mid Sussex is really a bit of an unknown. As a local authority, like many local authorities, we've faced and continue to face a huge challenge dealing with the response of government and any negative outcomes to support people. And throughout this, we've responded as a council extraordinarily well through our grants to businesses and people through very difficult times. But do you feel that the plan before us affords the necessary flexibility to respond to the problems that primary research suggests that an economic downturn could have on those families, particularly those in Mid Sussex that have not been previously unaffected by the pandemic? I refer particularly to those small businesses. Thank you.
Councillor Ash Edwards, would you like to have a go at that, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I think Councillor Bronson makes a good point in terms of the impact of this pandemic and this recession impacting different people compared to past recessions. So that's the nature of the particular types of sector that are most affected. Whereas we saw some of the very badly affected sectors now, such as hospitality, retail, were a source of jobs in the last recession that people moved into as growth sectors, and that's clearly not the case here. So clearly that impact is going to be different this time, and a lot of that will depend on Gatwick, given the number of connected jobs in our part of the country, but also around small business resilience. We know that we have a very large number of small businesses in Mid Sussex. In good times, that's normally a really positive thing because it means that our economy is not overly reliant on any single big employer in the way that some other geographies are. But of course, at a time where small businesses in many cases are really struggling and where resilience is an issue, then that's clearly a challenge for areas like ours. And what's happening at the moment is the continuation of significant amounts of financial support to businesses. We're continuing to run various business grant schemes on behalf of the government to get grant funding to those which are legally required to close or which are being adversely affected. And that will carry on. And as members will know, the discretionary grant scheme has deliberately been drawn as widely as possible to ensure that we can get that support to tide as many businesses through for this period. And we'll need to focus on the recovery when that time comes to ensure that businesses can adjust, can continue to be resilient and can make the most of the new opportunities that will be created, because whatever recessions are not nice things, but they do create opportunities as markets change as well. And so there will be people starting businesses and people growing businesses that need to be in as strong a position as possible to create jobs locally. And many of the actions that we've already agreed, both in terms of the COVID recovery fund that the Cabinet Grants Panel is administering, but also the longer term work we're doing on things like full fibre, are all important to make sure that we can bounce back as an economy as much as possible.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Chairman. I refer to paragraph 3.7 on page 13. Council tax is the major part of our income and it should always be so, obviously to fund both the running of the council and also our essential services. But we also need, as has been said earlier, some money also has to be put to boost our reserves. Probably in the future, when we have projects to go forward, obviously any capital spending will probably need to come out of the reserves as well. So obviously it's important that we do build up our reserves, which does mean we need to maintain our income from council tax.
Absolutely agreed, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Trumbull, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I assume we're talking on the pages up to 23 now. I mean, this section of our meeting was started by Councillor Alison Bennett, who wanted to open a debate on commercial activities, which I think is mentioned earlier on, the council being actively commercial. I think it's vital that we are. There's absolutely no question about that. I'd be interested to hear from anybody who has contra views, but I think in the current situation, the current government finance situation, it's absolutely vital that we are. And this has been the direction of travel for the past several years, I know. And Councillor Ash Edwards referred to this earlier on. We have been looking at commercial opportunities that are going to yield us income, but commercial opportunities that will be within the district, not as some districts have done outside the districts. I think it's very important that they are within the district, and they are commercial opportunities that will yield income and generate activity, support activity within the district that are going to be of benefit to our residents. So I think those are key things. And as far as I can see, that's what we are doing. And I believe we should continue doing that. So that comes back on that point that Councillor Bennett made earlier on. Just some other issues with this. I think Councillor Jackson mentioned just now. I think it is vital that we rebuild our reserves. In 4.2 on page 19, we talk about rebalancing our income and expenditure. That we've got to get to a situation where we are in balance in terms of what we get in, what we get out. I see that we're projecting using our reserves for the next 4 years. I understand Peter Stewart's point that it's desperately difficult to forecast what's going to happen in this year, let alone 4 years' time. When do we think we'll be in a position to start adding to our reserves and not using them? I'd like to know that, if we can have such a forecast. On page 15 at the top there, under insurance, the estimate of inflation at 5% seems quite hefty. Are we still using the chap in Worthing to do our insurance? And how satisfied are we with him? I seem to remember some question marks over that when I was dealing with some insurance issues, as you remember, Peter, a few years ago at Court Bushes. So I'd be interested to hear your views on that and the effectiveness of that service. Yes, I think those are the key points. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Trumbull. Another crystal ball question for you, Mr. Stewart. Would you like to try that in terms of the question about when we stop using reserves?
Yes, I mean, with respect to Councillor Trumbull's question, he starts his question with a statement that it's desperately hard to predict what's going to happen in the future. And then the second part of the question actually asked me to do exactly that. And I'm afraid with the best will in the world, I can't be drawn on that, I'm afraid. It is difficult to understand what's going to happen in the future. I think for next year, I'm sort of 80% confident that the figures in this report will be there or thereabouts, although they will change. It is simply a basis on which to base a budget next year. And then my confidence goes down as we go further out, as you'll understand. So, members, the council has agreed the strategy, the financial strategy agreed it in September last year, effectively for this year. I think I'm thinking that members are happy with that strategy for this year. And I suspect as we go through the year and things start to change, members would like to see the figures coming more into balance. That is completely understandable, and our job is to try and make that happen.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. And on the insurance question, Councillor Trump, if we not get too much too low down in detail, really. I mean, we're trying to look at the bigger picture here, but I'll allow that to be answered, Mr. Stewart, in terms of the gentleman in Worthing.
Well, I'm not going to talk about gentlemen in Worthing at all. I'm going to talk about the service. The service we received from Ada Worthing, I think, is first class for the money we pay, which is far less than we'd pay if we had a full-time officer working on insurance ourselves. And the same is true of many of these shared services, particularly go on record as saying the treasury management service we received from Ada Worthing, again, is first class, and it's as good as anything we ever provided ourselves.
Thank you very much. And I'll take one final question on this section from the Vice Chairman, Councillor Pulford, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's a comment, really. There was a comment earlier on 3.17, which indicated that we were lucky to have the reserves. I would suggest that we take into account what Councillor Edwards, Councillor Jackson and Councillor Trumbull have said. It's not luck, it's the prudent housekeeping that this council has had for many years in the past, which has led us into a very strong position to be able to serve our electorate as we do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Point well made, as others have made, Vice Chairman. Thank you very much. Right, on to section 2, service plans and summary budget plans, are pages 25 to 47. We're going to do it business unit by business unit. And the first one, I don't know if Judy, you want to give an introduction? Do you want to give an introduction, or do you want to straight into the business unit plan, please?
Yes, can you hear me, Chairman, this time?
I can now, yes.
Thank goodness. I'm so sorry, everybody. Apologies for that. I'll try and also touch on the point I think that members were trying to get to regarding the leisure service.
Thank you.
I didn't really want to give a very long introduction because I think they are the plans here are self-explanatory, but I don't think I could not mention the pandemic in respect of the business units that I have responsibility for. I think that you can all see the impact that has had, but not just on income levels, but actually on the demands placed upon the services. And I think it would be proper of me to actually credit the work of the business units insofar as they have not only responded to the demand that the pandemic has placed upon us, but they have actually also continued to perform well. And actually, in some cases, their performance has been exceptional. And I think there are some positives that we must take from this. So, for example, the fact that our contractors have responded very well and have maintained services, including actually the leisure service, the leisure contract, which has had some extreme challenges. The house builders have continued to build, and we're seeing affordable housing units coming on stream, which is really encouraging. We've been able to assist the vast majority of rough sleepers off the streets and into accommodation, which is a very positive point to make. And then I think that finally, just in respect of the impact on our income, we are anticipating by the end of this year a 50% reduction on car parking income. And I think that Peter has allowed for to be ongoing for at least a year. With respect to the leisure service, I think the questions being asked were about getting a crystal ball out. I think, as the chairman's already said, it is extremely difficult for us all to predict. I think that the experience of reopening the centres for the 3 months that we were able to open has been positive. It's enabled us to work closely with the contractors to drive down costs and focus on how we can increase income within the constraints of the restrictions, obviously, and the reduced capacity. But then, of course, we've had to deal with additional closures and also a couple of days in tier 3, which means we couldn't run any classes. So I think, in all fairness, it's extremely difficult for the contractors and the consultant that's supporting us to predict what the ongoing impact of that might be into 21-22. And therefore, it's extremely difficult to predict that, other than we are allowing for the fact that we're unlikely to receive any fee income under the current circumstances. I'm obviously happy to answer any questions in respect of the service plans. Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll go into business unit now, housing, planning and economic development, development management and commercial services, which is on pages 27 to 32. Councillor Whitaker, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to echo the comments of the Assistant Chief Executive and thank all the staff so much for all the work they've done this year. But also in the reports, looking at the highlights really, which are outstanding on the objectives, the temporary accommodation and the continuing purchase of those units in capital purchase, I think is a great investment. It saves on rental properties, so it's an investment for the future. The work to do with the site allocation DPD, which hopefully will come to examination very soon and get through. Thank you for that. The Burgess Hill growth development, the increases in planning permissions and site starts, and notwithstanding the planning department, there have been a lot more smaller planning applications because of the pandemic, and they've dealt with all of those in an admirable way. So I'd like to thank the whole team for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eaves.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'd like to very much welcome on page, page 28 at the end. It says excellent progress is being made on place and connectivity in Burgess Hill. Really pleased about that. That's shaping up very well. On page 27, I had submitted a question in advance about the Ernest Kleinwort Centre in Oakenfield in my ward, and it's just would be so perfect for homeless people, or particularly vulnerable people. And I see that in your answer you've said you have approached them in 2019 and 2020, which is great, but they're not sure yet what to do with it. And again, I would ask, if it's empty and if it's not furnished, surely we could be charging them double council tax, because that's what it says in our rules, and we need income, and that's the kind of place we could get it. So obviously we don't want to alienate them, but it's just a crying shame to have that building empty. Thank you.
Would you like to comment on that, Judy?
Chairman, I think that would be probably a comment for Peter Stewart. I don't know, Peter, if you want to say anything.
Sure.
Yes, Chairman, we are charging actually at Band G. Care homes are taxed on a strange sort of system. They are as a whole, so that the whole thing is banded at Band G. So we aren't charging the double yet. I don't quite know why that would be, but even if we were, it wouldn't raise that much money, because Band G is well at the top end of the council tax. It would probably charge another sort of £2,000 or £3,000, worth having, but not going to change the course of the budget that much. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Trumbull.
Thank you, Chairman. We are dealing with parking services at the moment, aren't we? So this is page 30. I wonder if someone could help me understand, please. In the parking services draft budget, we're forecasting for this year 493,000. Is that right? And then for next year, we're forecasting 1.4 million. So I just want to check I'm right there. Judy was just saying that we're forecasting I think you said, Judy, a reduction in income for next year. Just help me please reconcile those figures. And also, how does that estimate of 1.4 million, if that's right, compare to normal? Thank you.
Is that for Judy or for the numbers man, Mr. Stewart? Peter, Miss Peter, are you able to take that?
I think Peter's probably best placed to reconcile the numbers, but the forecast does show that we're anticipating a significant decrease in income from car parking charges, obviously this year, and that will be impacting on next year. Peter, did you want to say anything?
Yes, Chairman, it's simply that this year has been a disaster, if you like, in terms of income on car parks. Next year is better by some substantial margin.
Thank you. Councillor Hicks.
Chairman, just returning to leisure centres, I just want to make clear in terms of any additional costs on top of the management fee. Given it's unlikely that they will be reopened for at least a month or two, we're likely to see substantial costs in terms of subsidy on top of the management fee. So that is presumably a potential pressure for next year, where we could see, I don't know, do we have any, once they reopen, it could be a couple 100,000 that we pay out outgoing to before they can gain additional sufficient income to pay their way, even without the management fee. So I think we perhaps should just be aware of that issue as a potential negative impact on the budget. Can I just ask, Chairman, as well, are we looking at the service delivery plans as well as the budget itself at this stage?
So I missed the last bit. You're breaking up a little bit, Councillor Hickson. Can you look?
I was just asking, are we considering the service delivery plans as well as the budget themselves? For
we're in pages 27 and 32 on that.
It's because and in terms of the recycling targets that have been proposed in terms of the steady state, and we've seen with the pandemic, people have been working from home and producing more waste. Yeah, we've also seen a significant increase in the green bins in terms of a 15% uptake. And I think we perhaps need to be more ambitious in terms of how much recycling we should be supporting residents to use the service. And in terms of the target, remembering that a third of the recycling target is actually the green bins, and therefore we're slightly over egging the position in terms of if we're just using a target of the overall recycling rather than the separating out the dry waste and the organic material, and it's the dry waste that we need to focus on. And not unnaturally, we delayed the implementation of a textile recycling service. I just wonder if there's specific plans to bring that forward in terms of the next year.
Julie, would you like to comment on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think on the leisure centres point, again, all I can reiterate is that it's incredibly difficult to predict, because you could predict a budget for 21-22 on a number of assumptions, but of course all of them are just that, an assumption, and you just need the virus to peak again and the centres to close, and all of your predictions and assumptions are out the window effectively. And depending on which assumptions you back, you could be optimistic or pessimistic and see a massive swing in the amounts. But I think it is safe to suggest that it's on current trajectories, it's unlikely to see a return to a management fee anywhere like the income we were receiving during 21-22. With respect to the recycling, a target is literally just that, a target. And it's our best guess in terms of our experience based on previous performance and what we know about the industry. But of course, we're always really pleased if we are exceeding targets, and if the trajectory looks likely to be exceeded, we will suggest a change to that target, and we'll always seek to be stretching ourselves.
Thank you. Councillor Alison Bennett.
Thank you. I had a question relating to economic development and the development of the Sustainable Economic Development Strategy, if that's the right name for it. So this was proposed in the corporate plan in September, and one of the reasons that I abstained on the corporate plan was sort of lack of sight of that, because the work hadn't been done, and I want to be assured about that sustainability is sort of front and centre of economic development going forward. And I think Councillor Eaves has already made the point that sometimes economic development and sustainability are not always one and the same thing. So I was a little bit disappointed that there's not more on that in the proposed budget, but I do fully understand and appreciate how hard officers have been working and the difficult circumstances in which they've been working. So what I'd be interested in is where work on that sustainable economic development strategy has got to. It says that the papers say that the proposal will come forward later in the year. When in the year is that anticipated? I'm assuming it's not going to be before this budget round. And any information you can give about current thinking on that would be really, really appreciated. Thank you.
Judy, please.
Thank you. Yes, I'm pleased that you noted the recovery plan that we did as a council back in September, and I think that it's fair to say that because it was so detailed, we haven't reiterated everything that we put in that plan in the current corporate plan, but it is taken as read that that work will continue. And I can assure you that as officers, we've already been meeting and thinking carefully about how we will bring that work forward, including making a reserve of, I think it's 100k available to support that work in the coming financial year. So you will note on the work programme and the next item on the agenda that we are bringing forward a update on sustainability and a forward look, and it is the intention that we will include our thinking around bringing forward the sustainable economic development strategy in that paper, together with an indication on how members will be involved in the governance arrangements to support that.
Thank you. Councillor Brunson. Holly Brunson, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. It's picking up on Councillor Hicks and the comments made about leisure centres, and I think it's worth noting that we're probably in the midst through the pandemic of a seismic shift in how people take their exercise. And I think this council needs to recognise that there is likely to be a significant change to the new norm when it comes to what consumer behaviour will tolerate, and more clearly how people will think that they are likely to want to take their exercise in the future. You know, we're increasingly seeing through the pandemic connections through exercise that are online, and a move away from physical gyms and health clubs. And those cravings, I don't think, are going to go away. They are going to be, for the foreseeable future, something that people get used to. And the idea of having, you know, your exercise through some Peloton bike or some online connections through your TV screen are going to have an impact on our business and our health centres. And I wonder just how much we are recognising that this is a significant change in the way people are likely to want to return to, which are quite expensive and quite a luxury item in our armoury of services provided by this council. Thank you.
I think that's an interesting point, being a sportsman myself, and that very interesting to see whether people will go back to gyms. I mean, like things like heavy weights and that, I think that's difficult to do at home, but I have seen a lot of take up with people with these Peloton and Zwip bikes, I think they're called. They look fascinating. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that, Judy.
Not really, other than to say, of course, this is a national issue, possibly even an international issue, who knows. And the sector, you won't be surprised to hear the sector are all over this and considering it carefully. And I think it is, again, very difficult to predict because we haven't had a pandemic. So we haven't got any past experience to rely upon. But just suffice it to say that we are meeting with our contractors regularly and talking about how we can improve income and what changes need to be made in respect of that. But we're also meeting nationally with other with other councils, particularly those that are working with Places Leisure, to see how we can improve the offer and make sure that it is something that is attractive. But I think, unfortunately, it is going to be a case of let's wait and see. I don't think we can anticipate.
Yeah, but points are both well made there. I mean, I think there's also the aspect of social interaction as well with gyms, but perhaps we don't want to debate this too much. Councillor Eaves, is it a new point, please?
Thank you. Yes, Chairman. I'll just say on kettlebells, I went to Lidl the other day and within an hour they had all gone on that day, you know, when they do the lost leaders. So people are still out there who want this stuff. I'm addressing page 35, sustainability climate change. And Judy Holmes was saying it's 100K, but it's actually been cut now to 85K, I see. Do you know what's behind this yet? Do you have any plans of what to spend it on, or is that covered by Judy Holmes's previous answer? Thank you.
Judy?
Thank you, Chairman. It's covered by my previous answer. I think that would be too preemptive, and I think we would want to seek direction and involvement of members in that discussion.
Okay, thank you. I see no more on that section. Thank you, Assistant Chief Exec. We're moving on to the next business unit, revenues and benefits, community services, policy and performance, corporate estates and facilities, which is on pages 33 to 36. And Mr. Stewart will take this.
Just a few words from me, Chairman, actually, and I will start off by paying great credit to Kevin Stewart, no relation, who runs the Revs and Ben service. I think his service has been exemplary in giving these grants out to the businesses around the district, and that's going to continue. We didn't think it would at one point, but of course, as members will see, there is still many grants going out. It's just slightly confusing, I appreciate, but that will be one of the main tasks actually probably for the next year, allocation of grants, as well as collecting council tax and non-domestic rate. Talking of non-domestic rate, for next year we are leaving the whole county. The county pool is being dissolved, so we're back on it. We were never part of the pool, I should say, but just so members know, the pool across the county is being wound down, and so business rates across the county becomes quite important, and we need to put effort and resource into monitoring what's going on with our business rates, because it forms quite a central plank of our income in the future. As the papers show, the main area in finance, not only performing the statutory role of putting the accounts together, but there's a new income management system going in there. And so we're hoping to modernise. We're hoping to have an all singing, all dancing online cloud system that actually where we can use all kinds of different payment methods, such as, for example, PayPal, WorldPay, all the things that most people actually take for granted these days. Community services will be carrying on with its pandemic response, as well as offering the community grants, working with community bodies on new buildings, and as well, of course, as offering the wellbeing services, which I know are very much appreciated by people. And finally, corporate estates. What is it? The year for the corporate estates is looking like, as it mentions, a master plan for the Orchard Shopping Centre in due course, working with other business units on bringing forward a scheme at Burgess Hill Station, and working to improve our cloud system, which is called Technology Forge, which basically is not that interesting, but is actually it forms the central core of the council's property information, and it needs general updating all the time. I'd also say, of course, that sounds like a lot of work in itself, but there's also the ongoing management of all the assets we own, which of course takes staff resource over the year. So we're hoping next year is a less up and down year, if you like, than this year, but there's plenty to occupy ourselves.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for the report. I see no questions at the moment from Mr. Stewart. Okay, moving along to the next business unit, to customer services and communications, digital and technology services, human resources and payroll, pages 38 to 40. Raphael, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So I think I wanted to start with a big thank you as well. I think the business units were at the heart of our organization and were pivotal, our response to the pandemic, especially helping us to mobilize and move towards flexible ways of working. And I think you were part of this journey, and thank you for responding so openly and wonderfully to this, because it's always very difficult to make a change in such a snap way. But I think as an organization, we did extremely well last year, and it's a fantastic benefit to us going forward. So next year we'll continue this flexible kind of like agile ways of working, and we'll build on this. So in terms of the business units areas, we'll focus on basically building on our investment in cloud-based technologies and supporting other business units to understand the benefits of it and how we can maximize those, how we can work differently. I think last year was, for all councils across the country, it was a very good learning process, how we can deliver services differently. So this year will be about understanding that learning and learning from that wisdom that we gained last year. And I think these business units are in particularly, important for that, because it's not about just the technology. It's actually, processes. It's about actually people understanding how to work in this new way. So from HR perspective, we'll be investing in our staff to support them in this. So and from a technical perspective, making sure that they do it safely, and for continue to invest in this. So in a way, like it was really difficult here, but the next one, and actually years to come, will actually be really exciting from that point of view, because we learned a lot in a very short period of time, and we'll be building on this, and that's the work we'll focus now going forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I see Councillor Trumbull.
Thank you, Chairman. A comment, essentially. I'd just like to point up what is actually a phenomenal good news story in customer services and communications. I've been around long enough to remember when this was a pretty dire situation. We actually had a joint working arrangement, which wasn't going terribly well with some other councils. But look at the situation now, where we're handling all of those customer inquiries. We have a superb system in operation, and I think we actually get very good feedback on that. So I just wanted to point out that this is an area which was having difficulties, and it now has come right in an excellent way. So well done to all of the officers concerned there. I saw something there which I've not come across before, and perhaps I've missed it. But what is the people strategy and workforce plan for the organisation, which is on page 40? Thank you, Chairman.
Val, would you like to take that, please?
Yes, thank you. I totally agree with Councillor Trumbull. And in terms of people strategy, can be different things in different organizations. But basically what it focuses is analyzing what type of workforce you have in terms of planning, and then planning ahead in terms of what, what's the workforce profile, and how do you, plan succession planning, making sure that knowledge stays in the organization and people are supported. And then it's about developing people as well. So big part of our people strategy will need to be reflecting on the changes that people now need to operate within, and how we can support them. So organization development, which is a term to describe, supporting staff, making sure that they perform as best as they can in the new circumstances. So this will address that, and the workforce planning will address the issue that, for example, we have an aging workforce. When you look at, at the average age of our workforce, is a bit higher than normal councils. So how do you address that? How do we succession plan and make sure that, we hire people who can, stay with us and learn from the more experienced staff, and kind of like, we have this smooth transition.
Thank you. Councillor Hicks.
Thank you. I'd just like to highlight it in a period where we're moving to encouraging residents to contact us remotely. That we are not able to measure the customer satisfaction of those residents, and thinking about the online forms that we encourage people to use, that makes up of it's about a third of the contacts to the council are through that method. So I'd hope we would be looking fairly rapidly to include those within the monthly customer satisfaction scores, because we ask for a telephone number when somebody submits the online form. So it should be easy enough to actually do a sample, not just of people who contact us by phone, but those who contact us online, and noting that even things like complaints, that it's only an online form that you can actually submit a complaint in terms of the if you go on the website. So I think it is an area that perhaps we need to look at going forward.
Briefly, Raf, would you like to comment on that, Raphael?
No, thank you, Councillor, for the comment, and noted it. Yes, and we'll look into this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no more indications. So moving on to business unit, legal services, democratic services, local land charges, planning and building control, support, environmental health and building control. Tom Clark, please. Pages 41 to 46.
Chairman, as others have said, it's been a truly roller coaster year. That's been particularly reflected in environmental health, who have flexed around the changes in the restrictions, advising various organisations when they've been allowed to open, obviously not when they've been closed. We're now in a complete lockdown, so we've got supermarkets to check and other similar shops. But there was actually a lot more work when pubs and etc. were open and trying to comply with all the restrictions that applied. Land charges this year have had the most strange year. They've had quiet months, and then they've had incredible months. And during that period, they've had the largest income that they've ever had, sported on by the relaxation of stamp duty. We do not expect that to continue next year, with a far more stable year for them, and also for the team that register planning and building control applications. Those applications have continued in similar numbers, but on the whole have been smaller. We expect next year to start, obviously affected by the present lockdown, but then to move back to where we've been in the past. So we'd expect some larger building control applications, some larger planning applications. Democratic services are going to be busier next year, because they've both got the governance review to implement, as and when you agree that at your March council meeting, and also the elections, which, as was confirmed today, they are still on for the 6th of May, but they are probably needing, well, they will need a lot of extra thinking through to ensure that they're COVID compliant. So COVID will still affect us going into next year, but hopefully by January 2022, we won't be talking about it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tom. I see no, yes I do. Councillor Jackson, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I refer to the second paragraph on page 44, where it says, additional steps have been taken to deal with the enhanced postal vote, avoidance of close queuing at polling stations, and a COVID secure count, which may well mean longer period of counting. Now, in the sort of budget for elections registrations, you've got 358,000. Has that been included in that, and is that sufficient?
The elections are paid for, so the government paid for the police elections, and the county council paid for the county council elections. So these extra measures will cost more, but they won't be at our cost.
Thank you. I see no further indications, so we're going to move now into the third item, third section, capital programme. I'm going to take it en bloc, and the floor is yours, Mr. Stewart, pages 48 to 64.
Thank you, Chairman. There's not a great deal to say about this because members will see that in the appendix you have all the projects to make up the capital programme. But just a couple of things to say, and it's not immediately obvious, but I noticed on page 50, you have the list of the projects, and actually you have also on there how they are financed. Easily missed because about 2/3 of the way down is the total of the capital projects of 5.115 million. But there's a few lines then that tell you how it's financed, which also totals 5.115 million as well. So quite a modest range of projects. I'd like to think a couple more came forward because I know there's some in gestation before March the 3rd. But as I've said before at previous meetings, this is a flexible kind of document. Some councils will have a capital programme that's sort of set in stone from the 3rd of March, if that's their date, and that's it for the year. Whereas at Mid Sussex, we have tried to bring projects forward as they are ready. So you might see some more coming forward as part of budget monitoring during the year. But as I say, the programme's 5.115 million, all financed from a range of sources, and the details of the projects are in the capital justification statements that follow. Thank you.
Councillor Hicks, please.
Yes. Can I ask how we judge projects for their sustainability, thinking of in terms of environmental issues around the new windows or other building improvements, in terms of are we paying lower costs but sacrificing longer term sustainability and returns in reduced heating costs or whatever? How do we, what's the balance between the cost efficiency and issues around sustainability? I wonder if you could give an outline.
Did you get that, Mr. Stewart? It broke up a little bit, but do you get the gist of that?
I do, Chairman. I think the question really is, how do we judge the sustainability of projects, particularly around things like new windows or new heating? Well, I think on those particular issues, windows and heating, we are starting from quite a low base, I would say. First of all, I mean, if you walk around the campus, last time you walked around the campus, you'll probably be thinking, why is there just one pipe going to a radiator and then coming out and then going on to the next radiator? That can't be a very efficient system. And you'd be quite right. When you come back to the council offices now, you will find a 2-pipe system in place, which is, has been standard probably since Victorian times. But so we've replaced the heating with a modern system, and actually it's not only is it actually warmer more consistently through the council offices now, but it's also costing us less because we're not just opening up the windows to pump heat out of them. So we are trying to balance up where we're coming from, and the same would be true of the double glazing project. We are improving the double glazing. We are fitting the sort of double glazing, I suppose, you might find in your own home. It's building regulations approved. It's not triple glazing. It's not going to the far end of the scale. We are always balancing up the cost of these things against the benefit. And I think it's fair to say that double glazing has consistently been shown to save bills on your utilities, whilst also being quite a value for money product for an office. So it's a balance to be struck, and we do that across all the projects we run. We're not going to one end nor the other.
Thank you. Councillor Lynn Stockwell.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to comment that on these works programmes that have been going on for quite some time, I know from discussing them at previous meetings, there's been very sustainability has been the top watchword on everything there, and as it should be. I quite agree. I've got if people look at the papers that are there, that level of sustainability is always within what we're trying to achieve. I've got it's a bit of tongue-in-cheek really question regarding the heating works. I suspect there's a cost element to this, but have we put in the new boiler? I can't remember. And if not, have we considered ground source heat as a means of heating the council offices? Thank you.
Sorry, I missed that at the end of Councillor Stockwell. Sorry, I've got in my earpiece. I beg your pardon. Was there a question? Could somebody help me there, please? Lynn,
I think Mr. Peter Stewart will be able to answer that one.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. I do beg. Mr. Stewart, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm not sure we actually have looked at ground source heat pumps or those kinds of technologies. We've certainly got the room for it, but it would mean probably digging up car parks to do so. I'm not sure that'd be quite as sustainable as it might sound. So, you know, I think we have gas boilers. At some point in the future, we will need to talk about replacing those with probably electric boilers, energized, if you like, from sustainably generated electricity. So, you know, as I said earlier, we're not at one end of the sustainability continuum or another. We are always trying to get a value for money for these things.
Jim, you're on mute.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwell. Back to page 7, please. We're on to the recommendations. I'm going to try and take them on block here, otherwise we'll be here a very long time, because as the Tom Clark pointed out, we will be here. We're doing a name vote tonight. So we've got recommendation A, the financial outlook facing the council given the extent of the COVID-19 pandemic. A proposed increase to council tax, which is £4.95. The strategy to use reserves to balance the budget over the short term. The proposed capital programme and the service commentaries and supporting summary budget tables. So these are recommendations to Cabinet. Over to you, Tom Clark, please.
Yes, so the council's moved the recommendations on page 7, starting with Councillor Alison Bennett.
Wanted a verbal vote. Is that right, Mr. Clark?
Yes,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the voting system isn't working.
Okay, fine. I just thought I'd check. Abstain.
Councillor Heidi Brunston.
Approve.
Councillor Roger Cartwright.
Abstain.
Councillor Philip Coote.
Councillor Coote?
Yes.
Agree. Yep, say agree.
Me. Sorry.
Councillor Rachel Cromie.
Agree.
Councillor Anne Eves.
Against.
Councillor Simon Hicks.
Abstain.
Councillor Roger Jackson. Have I got that right? Abstain. Councillor Jim Knight.
Agree.
Councillor Andrew Lee.
Agree.
Councillor Chris Phillips.
Agree.
Councillor Mike Corfer.
Agree.
Councillor Lynn Stockwell.
Agree.
Councillor Colin Trumbull.
Agree.
And Councillor Rex Whitaker.
Agree.
Chairman, that's 10 in favour, 1 against and 4 abstentions.
Okay, so they are carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 8, Scrutiny Committee for Leader and Finance Performance Work Programme for 2020 to 21. Is that actually 21, 20? No, that's for the rest of this year. That's absolutely correct.
Yes, Chairman. At your next meeting on the 10th of March, you've got 2 items of quite a substantial nature.
Move to adopt.
Okay. Over to you, Tom. You want to take a vote on it?
Or I think probably on this you could use the raise hand, Chairman.
Okay, well, that's fine. Raise your hand if you agree to the work programme. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 9, questions pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 10 due to the notice which has been given. There is none. Therefore, I close the meeting at 18:29. I'd like to thank all members for their valuable contribution.